I'd like to call this meeting to order. The Committee on Growth and Infrastructure. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Vice Chair Brown May.
Here.
Assemblyman Carter. Assemblywoman Dickman. Here. Assemblywoman Gallant. Here. Assemblyman Gurr. Here. Assemblywoman Kasama. Here. Assemblywoman Marzola.
Here.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Here.
Assemblyman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Here.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Present.
Assemblyman Watts.
Here.
Thank you. I want to welcome everyone to the committee here today in Carson City and Las Vegas and viewing over the internet. On our agenda today, we will have one bill presentation, Assembly Bill 105. Before we start, there are a number of housekeeping items. If you would please all silence your electronic devices. If you wish to testify, please sign in at the table by the door and provide a business card to the committee secretary. For those joining online, please be sure to mute your microphone when you're not speaking to minimize any background noise. When testifying, please turn on the microphone and clearly state your name and affiliation, if any, for the record, and then turn the microphone off each time you're done speaking. Handouts, 10 copies for each member of the public. Electronic copies should have been submitted to our committee manager by 1:30 yesterday for members. And we expect courtesy and respect in all our interactions during the meeting, even if we may not agree with another person's position. Committee members will be using their laptops to view handouts and other documents. Please do not view this as a sign of disrespect or inattention. I will now open the hearing on Bill number 105. Assemblyman Watts, if you would like to begin when you're ready.
When testifying, please turn on the microphone and clearly state your name and any affiliation for the record, then turn the microphone off.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I am Howard Watts. I have the pleasure of representing District 15 in Clark County, right in the heart of Clark County. And it's my pleasure to present Assembly Bill 105 for your consideration today. The last few years have highlighted how important it is for people and businesses to be connected to the internet. Unfortunately, the last few years have also shown how large the digital divide still is, with many communities lacking high-speed connectivity and many others lacking affordable internet access. 1 year ago, HR&A advisors conducted an assessment of Clark County's broadband, and here's what they found. Clark County had the worst median broadband speeds of its peer counties, and plan prices were at least 30% higher than the national average. For a 50 megabyte per second plan, the difference was $23 a month. That's about $275 per year. In other words, we're paying more for less. The only data that we have on this issue is from the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, and it's limited. So the problem could, in fact, be worse, particularly in certain community zip codes. One of the suggestions from that assessment was exploring internet service providers that may be interested in public-private partnerships who are not in the county, but may be interested in meeting your public policy goals and developing a more competitive environment for the county. And that really is the ultimate goal of Assembly Bill 105, more choices and competition without an investment of public funds. Under current law, video service providers, or cable companies, and large telecom providers, or legacy telecom providers, are granted a presumptive right to access public utility easements, areas of the rights-of-way needed to efficiently deploy broadband infrastructure. These companies were pioneering internet service providers, and depending on the service they provide, they are subject to a range of federal, state, and local regulations. But now there are new entrants onto the internet service providing scene, broadband-only providers. They don't really fully fit into those previous definitions of a public telecommunications company or a video service provider. And so they don't fit into a lot of those federal regulatory structures either. As they seek to negotiate right-of-way access agreements with local governments in order to build out their own high-speed fiber optic broadband networks, their ability to be even allowed that access has been called into question. The objective of this bill, AB 105, is to clarify that, the ability of a local government to negotiate with any broadband provider to access those easements. By clearly requiring licensing and authorization, we envision the following conditions would need to be met. Any company wishing to take advantage of this would need to negotiate a license agreement subject to applicable local ordinances, permits, fees, and other local right-of-way standards. Any easement access must protect property owners and not impose a material burden on the property or interests of the owner and the easement grantor. And easement access must not materially interfere with the existing use of that easement by any other existing utilities or service providers. I think as we proceed through this hearing, you'll hear some concerns about the bill and the current language, concern that some of these processes might be circumvented, and I just want to be clear at the outset that that's not the intent. We just want to ensure that all internet providers, regardless of whether they provide video or phone service or not, have the opportunity to go through this process of gaining access to these easements or right-of-ways and are not prohibited because they fall through the cracks of existing language. We all, I think, share the goal of equitable access. There are some disagreements at this point on how we get there with the language. Some have proposed treating broadband-only providers as cable companies. I don't think that is necessarily the right approach, but through conversations with stakeholders, we've prepared an initial amendment to try and clarify some of these concerns and are committed to ongoing conversations. I think we're going to continue to see some adjustments to the language moving forward to get to a place that is fully aligns both the language and the intent. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Musgrove to discuss the amendment language that has been submitted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chair, Acting Chair, Brown May, members of the committee, Dan Musgrove here with Strategies 360 on behalf of Google Fiber. And what you heard Mr. Watts describe is exactly why we're here today, our true intent, and the fact that Google Fiber has already been in 14 metropolitan areas doing the very same thing and chose Las Vegas as the next municipality that they want to expand their capabilities and, more importantly, the capabilities of that community by bringing in broadband fiber. And they were already beginning the work with the local governments. We had had discussions with all the local governments down in southern Nevada. And then it came to our attention through the city of Henderson, actually, that they thought it might be very important for us to, as Mr. Watts describes, ensure that we didn't fall through the cracks. Because in a non-home rule state like Nevada, unincorporated Clark County, for that matter, might not have the ability to grant us that access because it does not specifically describe in NRS a broadband provider. Because when these statutes were created back in the 70s, no one even knew what broadband probably was to this degree that we, as Google Fiber, wants to do it in Nevada. And again, this bill is truly agnostic. Anybody can do it. It's not for Google Fiber. We just happen to be the first to really come and seek this permission from the local governments and found out that we needed to tweak the statute. So that's why we're here today. And the amendment that you see in front of you is our first really go around in solving some of the issues. Most of the language on this comes from my work with the local governments on what they felt they needed to ensure that they, as Mr. Watts described, had the ability to sit down with us and give us true permission to access their right-of-way and the right-of-way of their constituents. And so if you look at that amendment, it really just, the most important thing I think was in the original draft, it talked about exclusive easement or right-of-way. And again, it's exclusive easement and right-of-way, and talks about being licensed and authorized, not licensed or authorized. Again, as Mr. Watts described, we have to work with our local government partners to get that permission to work in the right-of-way. Very candidly, the worst thing you can say at the legislature. We thought this was a very simple bill in that it really was just granting broadband providers that same access that those historical institutions that have always been in that access have always had. And granted, now that we're working with our stakeholders, we realize that we need some tweaks. We are committed to working those out. And so hopefully before work session, you will see a document that satisfies almost everyone. Obviously, this is a bill that as again, Mr. Watts described, forces competition and forces folks to look at customers to look at what is in their best interest as to who they choose. And there may be some legacy folks that find that competition a little bit intimidating, but I think that's good for our communities to have that kind of choice. And so unless there's specific questions as to the amendment, again, this was our work with the local governments. We're continuing to work with the other stakeholders like NV Energy, Southwest Gas, NAOP, home builders. And again, I think everyone supports the concept. They just want to make sure that the language is right, as we all do in this building. So with that, I stand open for questions. If not, I'll turn it over to Mr. Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Musgrove. And if it please the Vice Chair, I'd also like to allow our other presenter to give a few remarks, and then we'd be glad to take any questions that the committee may have.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Brendan Pinkard, counsel for Google Fiber. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss AB 105. As a prospective provider of competitive broadband in the state, we support this modest amendment because we think Nevadans should have the opportunity to choose between and among competitive providers of broadband service, and that access to the right-of-way should be granted on fair, equitable, and competitively neutral terms. Over the course of the last several days leading up to this hearing, we've talked to a number of you and stakeholders throughout the community and the state. And we've heard quite a bit of enthusiastic support for the bill, and also some detractors. We've learned that I think the detractors have a vested interest in complicating what is quite a simple proposed amendment. So I'd like to take the opportunity to just simplify what specifically AB 105 would propose to do. It's important to note that this is not a new policy. State law grants narrow easements to public utilities, telecommunications companies, and video service providers. As a creature of state law, these public utility easements cover a narrow portion of private properties. Think the portion of yards that run along the sidewalk or the streets, based on the premise that it is in the public interest to facilitate the deployment of this essential infrastructure. When this law was drafted many decades ago, broadband-only providers, such as Google Fiber, didn't exist, but telecommunications and cable companies did. Given how reliant we've all become on broadband today, and as has been amplified in recent years with remote work and school through COVID-19, it is almost inconceivable that broadband providers wouldn't also be granted the same access to the public utility easements as the telecoms and cable companies enjoy today, were this bill drafted fresh today. The proposed bill would fix this accident of history by simply updating the law in a modest and narrow manner to reflect the evolution of infrastructure in the 21st century. Again, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and we look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
That concludes our presentation. We'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a number of questions. Thank you for the presentation. We're going to start with Assemblyman Carter.
Thank you for the good presentation. My question centers around, you kept referring to the legacy providers, and the legacy providers, in return for access to the citizens and those easements, have a significant investment in the community, a significant responsibility to maybe not access everybody, but to take and provide service to a broad scope, not just picking off the low-hanging fruit. And so what are the plans to ensure that that part of the playing field is level?
So that's a very good question, Assemblyman Carter. Oh, Brendan Pinkard, for the record, through the chair, I'd like to address this question, the Assemblyman's question.
Thank you. You can go direct to the member. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. That's a good question. So I think it's important to note that there are significant conditions associated with this easement access. So you mentioned the legacy providers, and they are regulated at the state level. Because of innovations in technology, broadband providers are now offering a new service that is not contemplated under state law. Most states don't regulate broadband service. And that's in the interest of fostering competition and innovation and so forth. So we, as a broadband-only provider, we are not subject to Public Utility Commission regulation like the cable companies or the telecoms. But the proposed bill, AB 105, would impose the condition that any broadband-only provider that is granted access to the easement must first negotiate and enter into local right-of-way agreement with the municipality in which it wants to build out and invest in broadband infrastructure. Those agreements are, one, closest to the rights-of-way, right? Because what we're talking about is easements that are located in these specific municipalities. And what that condition does is it subjects those broadband providers to negotiations with those municipalities and allows those municipalities to establish the terms and conditions on which those broadband providers will deploy and occupy the public rights of way. Additionally, in terms of accountability, the easement bill has two additional important conditions, which is one, that the use of the easement by the broadband-only provider cannot materially affect the property owner's enjoyment of their property, and also that it can't materially affect the use of the easement by the other occupants of the easement, the public utilities, the telecom providers, and the cable companies. So there are significant protections built in, and the notion that there's inadequate oversight associated with this easement occupancy by broadband providers, I think is very well cared for in the proposed legislation.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is John Burchett, and I'm the Policy Director for Google Fiber. And Madam Chair, if I could address specifically to some of your questions, yes, historically, the cable companies and the telcos were given access in exchange for something, and there were some, like peg channels and things like that. That was also historically in exchange for a monopoly, which a lot of those providers have exercised for the last 30 years. We can't speak for all broadband-only providers. Our business model is when we go into a city, we intend to build as much of it as possible. We can never say 100% because some people live behind a railroad track or, out on 5 miles out of town. But our goal is to build as much as possible. We have a robust community impact program in the communities where we go in. It's focused on digital equity, and we work with nonprofits in the communities that are working on digital equity. And, we will have an affordable low-income product. We're part of the ACP program, the federal program. So we very much care about some of the issues you're talking about as we are planning our build-out.
Very good, thank you. And as a follow-up kind of statement sort of question, is that we're seeing a sea change in technology. And we've seen that before in this state that's going on right now, and we're now trying to play catch-up. And I'm talking about the shift to electric vehicles and the dissolution of the revenue stream that helped maintain our highways. I want to make sure that as we keep that in mind, that this technology shift that we take and make sure that we keep those revenue streams in place to support what the existing infrastructure supports.
Thank you, Howard Watts, for the record. I appreciate that concern, Assemblyman, and I'll just say I'd like to turn it over to folks from Google Fiber to provide their perspective. Speaking personally, again, first of all, I think all of this comes down to we just want to make sure that these companies have the ability to go to the local government and negotiate it. And I at a minimum, hope that our local governments negotiate a variety of terms, both in the terms of deployment and service, accessibility, quality, as well as the cost associated with being licensed, that helps address some of those issues and ensures that we maintain the benefits associated with that as the technology shift happens and as more competitors potentially enter the market. I hope that it will be a benefit in a variety of ways.
Can I add? John Burchett from Google Fiber. We're currently in conversations with municipalities to make sure that they have revenue that is going to be commensurate with some of the revenue they've gotten historically. The franchise rule in Nevada, as in most states, is 5% for video revenue. None of the incumbents pay any percentage on internet revenue. As more and more people cut the cord, that video revenue is going down. We are working with the local governments, and we've done this in all the markets that we're in, to make sure and it's a number lower than 5% because that 5% number is going down and the base is much broader, a number that would allow the cities to maintain that revenue that they currently get out of the franchise agreement.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I need to start a little bit from the beginning. Like, what is the big problem, right? Because I feel like we've been seeing broadband we've been talking about it in this body, we've been funding it across the state. Like, where did the problem arise? Where was broadband being laid if not in the easements? I guess I don't understand, like, the baseline of where the problem arose.
Thank you for that question. Howard Watts for the record. Again, I'll turn it over to potentially get some additional background on this, but I believe that when this company in particular approached local governments about deploying, there was concern that we have some clear language that allows telecom companies, utilities, and video service providers access to these easements, these rights of way to deploy service. But because there's concern that they don't have authorization to enter into a similar licensing and authorization process for a broadband-only provider. And to the larger point of your question, I think a lot of the conversations about expanding the deployment of broadband have been with providers that are already located in the state.
John Burchett for the record. Yeah, I think Chairman Watts answered that perfectly correctly. We also, the problem around broadband is in part there's a lack of competition. And if there's one major incumbent that's, got 95% of the market share, it's the likelihood of higher speeds and lower costs and better service is less than if there were 2 or 3 providers. So as the goal of getting broadband being affordable and at the speeds we're all now expecting, competition is sort of a requirement. And a lot of the broadband funding and stuff is to get to places in the state, and Nevada is a very good example of places with very, very rural areas that are really expensive and hard to get to. So that's what I think you're going to see a lot of this federal funding that's coming down, and the state will be able to choose where that federal funding goes. Much of that will be going to those unserved places in rural Nevada.
Okay, so what has been happening is the broadband that's been deployed is coming from companies that fall under those telecommunications or entities that are already defined in here, but then going out and laying the broadband framework infrastructure under that definition. Okay. I think the other thing that I need clarification on is the easement? Who, like, it sounds like, so the counties own the easement, but talk about what that relationship is with the property owner and what the relationship is with the infrastructure that's already laid in the easement.
Thank you for the question. Howard Watts for the record. Again, I'll probably turn this over to get a little bit of additional context. One of the things I'll speak to again is the intent of the bill, which I think has been the topic of a lot of discussion. There's been concern that the goal of this is to get around some of the existing processes to negotiate, and there are both rights of way that are managed by local governments. There are also easements that are on private land, and so the intent of the bill is that the process would remain exactly the same for consulting with those private landowners, getting their, requiring them to agree, potentially compensating them if there's any impact, and then on the local government side, again, going through a licensing and authorization process and ensuring that the way that the work's going to be carried out is held to a high standard and doesn't impact anybody else using that right of way. So that is, at least I want to speak to kind of the intent of how we see it working, but if anyone else wants to discuss about the right of way or easement kind of process.
Brendan Pinkert for the record. Thank you, Chairman Watts. So under existing state law, every parcel of property in the state is required to set aside, dedicate a small portion of their property for public utility easements. That's been true for decades, and that's true throughout the country, which is why oftentimes you'll see telephone poles in people's yards or small handholds located in the front of somebody's grass. So that's a requirement of state law right now. And the class of providers who are enumerated under the existing statute, who are granted access to that small easement on private property, is limited currently to public utilities, telecom providers certified by the state, and video service providers also regulated at the state level. So again, this would just would be a modest amendment to that provision of existing state law, decades-old state law, to expand the scope to of the enumerated class of providers who are granted access to these private easements granted by the state to broadband providers in order to promote and accelerate the broadband efforts that you've seen throughout the state here and really nationally.
John Burchett, for the record. And to add on to what's already been said, I think there's a misconception, or there has been a misconception that we've been trying to counteract for the last day or so, that this somehow would impact private easements that people have negotiated across their property. That somehow if you had negotiated with somebody to let them have access to your property, that somehow this would allow a broadband-only company to jump into that easement. That's not the case. That's not the intent, and we'd be happy to make sure the language is crystal clear on that. The intent is to just stay within the public utility right-of-way and act like another public utility. And, and it also requires, like anyone who goes in the infrastructure, anytime the gas company or the water company or an incumbent goes in, they have to go to the locates regime. They have to call in 811. They have to figure out exactly where everyone else's infrastructure is and dig in a way that doesn't bother that. That requirement will be on the broadband-only providers. So it shouldn't be any different for the existing people in the infrastructure or for the existing landowners. It will just be a different entity going on their property periodically to either lay down infrastructure or to fix infrastructure.
One more follow-up. So related to the other infrastructure in the easement, what is the obligation, the existing law to that equipment that's owned by other entities in this public easement? What is the obligation there with relation to other folks' infrastructure, other owned infrastructure?
John Burchett for the record. Like anyone who digs, even if you dig in your own front yard and plant a tree, you're supposed to call 811. And then the 811 systems, the existing people who have infrastructure there have in most places it's 2 days, I don't know what the rule is here, to come out and mark exactly where their stuff is. And then we can't dig right where their stuff is. Anytime you're building infrastructure, sometimes things happen, sometimes things get hit. If the water company is repairing a sewer a sewer thing, they might hit the gas line, they might hit the Cox line, but the system is designed to minimize those dangers by putting requirements on anyone who digs. Those requirements would be on the broadband-only providers and us in particular if we're the ones who are digging. Our methodology is a little different than most. We do shallow trenching between 6 and 14 inches deep. Most infrastructure, your gas mains, your water, most infrastructure is between 24 and 36 inches deep. We do that because it's an innovative, less costly, faster way to deploy broadband, but it has the added benefit of having less interference with existing infrastructure. So we would have the exact same obligation that the gas company has when they go in to dig in this easement that they've been operating in for 40 years.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Kasama.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everybody, for the presentation. And I think we all sitting here know that we always want to expand broadband and make it accessible to everybody because it's our way of life now and expanding that. But I do have two questions based on some of the information you were sharing. So you were talking about with the amendment at that for the new providers to come in and use the trenching and the areas that were already there, that you would work with the public utility companies and work with them as far as a payment or if something was required. Is that correct?
Howard Watts for the record. So, again, we want what we envision is that a broadband-only provider would follow the same process as any other existing provider. So, in terms of, if it's gaining access to that easement, and that is really, and that access is managed by a local government, then that's going to be negotiated with a local government. There's going to be an agreement, and that's going to include a payment to the local government to be licensed. In the event that there is an impact on any private landowner or entity, then there would have to be a negotiation that would allow that private entity to consent, and that would potentially involve compensation.
So there would be a negotiation there. What about for, let's say, cable companies that 20 years ago went and dug the trenches, and we know this is very expensive, huge capital investment for them. Is there any compensation anticipated for those people for the infrastructure that they put in, not the public utility company, but the people that went and dug the trenches and have invested millions, if not billions, in many areas?
Thank you for the question. Howard Watts for the record. What I'd say is that, again, and this was kind of brought up in previous testimony, one of the benefits was exclusive access, and that's been enjoyed for quite a long period of time, although there have also been, as was noted by other members of the committee, continued innovation. It used to be everything had to go in the ground. Then there was satellite technology that allowed the provision of different services without even having to do any digging. And so we're going to continue, I think, to see innovation and additional ideas for competition. And even now, we do have multiple internet service providers here in the state. So things are kind of changing on that front. And again, what we're looking at, what we envision is to have a uniform fair process for any provider to have access to those easements to deploy the technology that they want, and that they contribute for being able to access that infrastructure and have the opportunity to serve the community, and that foundation will be applied across the board.
John Burchett for the record. It would be unheard of to require a competitor to compensate an existing business for competing with them. That's not happened anywhere in the country that I'm aware of. So no, there would be no, the existing companies have made a lot of money for many years because they chose to deploy their assets and build a business. New broadband providers are now asking for the right to do the same thing. And to be hobbled by having to pay the existing incumbents for the right to compete with them would be highly problematic.
So I'm just trying to understand it. So if Google went out to a rural area and built infrastructure, then other providers would have access to that as well?
No, they would not necessarily have access to our infrastructure, and we're not asking for access to anyone else's infrastructure. But if somebody else came in and built infrastructure behind us, we'd have to compete with them. And that's the way it frankly should be.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Brendan Pinkert for the record. Assemblywoman, thank you for the question, because I think it does give us an opportunity to clarify what we're proposing here with this bill and what our intentions are in terms of how we intend to deploy. We're not proposing to use any other provider's infrastructure. We intend to make our own investment to the extent we're able to deploy here in the state. And this bill wouldn't grant us the right to dig or the right to use anybody else's infrastructure or otherwise leverage the investment that they've made. All this bill would do is grant us access to the space that the state has dedicated for the purpose of public utilities and similar providers. We would have to make our own investment and occupy our own space and make sure that our occupancy and installation of our facilities within that space doesn't interfere with the other providers you referenced who came here before us. So in fact, there are mechanisms in place to protect their investment and just to allow us to use the area of the private rights of way that the state has already granted.
Second question? Yeah. And then the other one, and you alluded to this, I just wanted to make sure when it came to the private property easements, obviously I'm in real estate, private property rights, a taking of a private property without due compensation I would have a lot of angst over that. So it sounds like you're saying this is running in the public easements that have been granted, but I would want to make sure there's really clear language that should it be any easements for private owners, that would have to be, I can't see a state statute saying it's granted. That would have to be negotiated with each owner.
Howard Watts for the record. Thank you so much for that. And again, want to make sure that we've got the intent very clear and have heard some of those concerns and again are open to language from all stakeholders to make sure that is absolutely clear. The focus is on the public easements and rights of way. And again, if any provider wanted to pursue a negotiated access on a private easement, we want to make sure that they have the ability to do so, but this is not intended in any way to circumvent the process, which would be sitting down with that private property owner and discussing and coming to an agreement, whatever the terms of that agreement would be.
Thank you.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chairman Watts, for the presentation and those who are sitting with you. So you mentioned earlier that the telecom companies had franchise agreements because they offered phone. You are not speaking, I haven't heard you speak at all about broadband also offering telephone service. Google has Google Phone. How are you all going to address that, right? Because that is part of what you all are offering as a service. And earlier you mentioned that there's a franchise cost that other folks have to pay for phone service. But your service, it is phone, but it is offered through broadband. How do we manage that? Because you're appearing to me, and I'm not a cable person. I don't understand all of this, but you're still offering parallel services, but you don't want to be considered the same type of a utility per se.
Thank you for the question. John Burchett for the record. We do offer phone over broadband. And I'll have Brendan jump in. He's more of the federal expert on this. But under the federal rules, first of all, the franchise fees are not for phone at the state level. They're for video, for TV. And we do not offer TV, and it's very specifically, traditional TV over cable. And we don't offer that, so we would not be subject to that payment. We are working with cities to have a right-of-way fee, so cities can have somewhat comparable revenue coming off of the right-of-way fees that over time we think will be much greater than what they over time will get from video fees because video usage is going down. The Universal Service Fund that's run by the FCC, that's the organization in Washington that collects a small fee on phone bills. That's an issue that's being debated at the federal government because so many people do no longer have a landline. So those fund levels are going down, and they're looking like they look at Social Security or other big things and say, wait a second, our funding stream is drying up on this. How are we going to, what are we going to do? And that's been talked about for years, and it probably will be talked about for another couple of years before it's resolved. But by all of the accounts, no broadband, no voice over internet protocol that you hear about VoIP, that is not included in most of those Universal Service Fund definitions. So we're following the same rules that, that everyone sort of agrees. This is the structure now, and it will take time for the legal framework to catch up with the technological framework.
Okay, so that makes perfect sense, and I'm sure they'll figure this out on the federal level. I just want to make sure that I'm clear about right-of-way easement. So there's public works people in the audience, so y'all can nod your head, no, I've got it wrong if I'm wrong, or yes if I've got it right. In my years in my other life, this public agency that collected gas tax dollars from our taxes would lay conduit on the side parallel to the sidewalks. That was the right-of-way easement that they would run fiber, and there's an extra tube there in the ground in new construction that allows our public utilities, mostly our cable people, to also pull their cord so that the streets are not torn up. Are you saying to us that you also want to be able to access that conduit to pull your fiber so that you can service areas and compete with them in certain areas, or are we talking about two different things?
John Burchett for the record. That's a great question. What happens is there's in different cities and communities, there's governments have laid dark fiber that's not being used. Governments have laid conduit. Different entities, gas companies, water companies have laid conduit next to some of their pipes. When those are available, we would negotiate and ask to have access to them. That would be likely a situation where you would pay a fee to do that because it would be a dramatic reduction in your costs. And that's sort of a separate negotiation. it is everyone's goal to have as little disruption to streets and people's yards as possible. And if, it's a best practice for cities to lay conduit when they're doing construction, because then their streets are being cut up a whole lot less by a whole lot less companies. And so that is based on the availability. And sometimes now it's possible a cable company might have laid its own conduit during a construction period, and that's their private conduit. We wouldn't have access to that unless they chose to grant it to us, and at that point, they would sell it or rent it. That's based on their business interest and our business interest. But if it's a government conduit, a lot of governments, when we go talk to them, the first thing they say is, we have a whole bunch of dark fiber. Are you interested in leasing it? And we say, okay, let's have the business people talk over on that side, because that gets our deployment faster, it gets more competition faster with less disruption, and that's a win-win all the way.
Talk to us, please, quickly about speeds and what you all are expecting to offer in our communities. I think that's really important, that we're not the lowest speed in the nation.
John Burchett, for the record, our baseline product is 1 gigabit. That's 1,000 megabits. Most folks might be averaging, I think Chairman Watts said something around 100 megabits was an average, if I heard that correctly. So this is all through fiber. It's more than you will need at the moment, but with increasing usage, you're going to need that. That's our baseline product. We also have a 5 gig product, and we're testing a 20 gig product. You aren't going to need that for your email, but as things increase, and that's just our baseline. So all of our customers have access to that, that's how we built the business model. We charge $70 a month for that. We've charged $70 a month for that since the day we started operating 12 years ago. So, that doesn't mean there's never going to be a price increase, but that is our standard speed and our price.
Thank you. We have 2 more members with questions. Assemblywoman Gallant.
Thank you. To just piggyback on that question about speed, you said was that doing your download? And then, because there's an upload speed too.
John Burchett, for the record, thank you for that. I neglected to say that's symmetrical.
Okay.
So a lot of times you'll get a decent download, but you'll get a very slow upload with various different technologies. Fiber technology is going to be symmetrical, so it's going to be 1,000 down and 1,000 up.
Okay. So I've been learning about these government funds that everybody has received in order to get broadband everywhere, and we don't meet the criteria, or we don't have that technology, but fiber would give us that technology. So are you planning on working and accessing those funds somehow? And sorry to put you on that one.
John Burchett, for the record, we've had a lot of internal discussions about it. There are a ton of strings attached, and at the moment, we aren't applying for federal funds. One of the things is the federal funds are first designated, and this is appropriate, for unserved areas. And those unserved areas tend to be very rural and very isolated. In our business model, we haven't figured out how to get there even with a government subsidy. Other people, and namely, this is an area where some of the incumbents, if they're already serving people through a telephone line or something, it's a whole lot cheaper. So I think what you will see is them and maybe satellite people and wireless folks, they're the ones who are predominantly going to be applying for these funds. And, it's a once-in-a-generation opportunity. I know the state's taking it seriously, and, this is a chance to get most of that funding to unserved areas. There should be funding left over for what they call underserved areas that have what we would now consider pretty slow speeds, 25 download and 3 upload. I think that's the number. Maybe it's, I might have that number wrong. People are going to kill me. But those areas are going to be a little harder to define because the broadband maps are not super accurate yet. The FCC is working on that. But your broadband office in the state should be working with the local governments and all the companies in the next year when that funding comes downstream and you have to start deciding which projects to fund. So there's a whole big process. It's somewhat new. The federal government hasn't done it this way in the past, but there's a huge opportunity, and I think it's just great policy for folks to really be focused on that.
Thank you. We'll close out with Assemblyman Gurr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, we've had broadband being installed in the area I live in, and it's in the right-of-way, and I think everybody's got to understand what right-of-way means, and I hope they do now. That's why I said probably this is done. But 2 broadband companies have come into rural Nevada and are putting this in through the mining industry and through government, I would assume. And they're cleaning up a whole bunch of this, and you guys won't even go there. But I think simply, does this bill not just give you the right to get in and compete on that level? So how your business model works out, it's up to you in my mind. I think the bill, if it just gets you in the game, that's a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman Howard Watts. For the record, yes, that is the intent.
Thank you. We do have one more question, Assemblywoman Dickman.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you, Chair, for the bill. This is, I guess, for Mr. Burchett, because I heard the word monopoly, and the way I heard it, maybe I misunderstood, was but kind of like these companies, and there are a number of them. Maybe it was a monopoly initially, but it almost made it sound like they've only done all these community-minded things because it was their payment for getting a monopoly. And so I guess my question is, I mean, are you planning to just pick the low-hanging fruit as opposed to doing the stuff in the rurals and the underserved people, just to compete in the easy areas?
Howard Watts, for the record. Thank you very much for the question, Assemblywoman. A couple things. I think that there's definitely been corporate interest in benefiting the communities in which they're located. I think that is shared no matter legacy provider, potential new providers. And that's one aspect. And absolutely, there's another aspect that was negotiated community benefits for being given access to a customer base. To your larger point, I think Mr. Burchett can speak on behalf of his company. And again, this is the company that's come forward that's interested in pursuing this right now. This is not a Google Fiber policy, so potentially other broadband providers could come in and look to serve additional areas. Again, this company has not figured out a way to cost effectively deploy to some of those rural areas. And so back to some of the previous questions, that's more for some of the other providers utilizing some of that federal funding to help deploy out into those communities. They are looking at adding another option and hopefully driving down the cost for everybody in the urban area, and I think express their intent to serve as many people within that area as possible.
Thank you for the question, John Burchett, for the record. I absolutely had no intention to impugn the motives of any company doing good works. All companies should be doing as much as they can within their business, capabilities to help in the community, and I'm sure the incumbents here have done some great things. So absolutely no desire to impugn that. We will work with communities, and the communities we're talking to are large, like Henderson, Las Vegas, Clark County, and our goal is to serve as many people in those places as possible. And our track record is, doing infrastructure takes a lot of time, so you don't get to everyone right away. But, we are building out whole cities, and we are not going in and taking the 10 best neighborhoods and calling it a day. That is absolutely not what we've been doing or have any interest in doing.
That's good to hear, because we know there are many underserved communities and cities as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we get to those.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation and answering questions. At this time, we'll hear testimony in support, opposition, and neutral on Assembly Bill 105. Please remember to clearly state and spell your name and limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Staff will be timing each speaker to ensure that everyone is given a fair opportunity to speak. We'll begin testimony here in support of Assembly Bill 105, and we'll start here in Carson City, and then we'll move down to Las Vegas. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Mike Cathcart, Mikecathcart, representing the City of Henderson. The City of Henderson is supportive of AB 105 with the amendment provided by Mr. Musgrove, and we appreciate the sponsor with working with us on the local government language. The city is supportive of bringing additional broadband services to our community and look forward to working with all providers who want to expand access for Henderson residents.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Cadence Matievich, representing Washoe County. That is Cadencematijevich. It's nearly half the alphabet for you. I will echo the comments of my colleague from Henderson. Expanding broadband access to our communities in Washoe County is part of the Washoe County strategic plan under innovative services. And so to the degree that this bill will help that effort, we are very much in support. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ashley Garza Kennedy on behalf of Clark County. I originally signed in neutral today, but after the testimony and seeing the amendment that was presented before you, wanted to come and testify in support with the amendment that was presented. I think our Board of County Commissioners has been very vocal that we want to expand access to broadband, and just wanted to put that on the record. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Randy Robinson on behalf of the City of Las Vegas, here to testify in support of the bill as amended. Appreciate the chairman's intent to drive these conversations to the local level so that we can appropriately negotiate an agreement that makes sense for our communities. As you heard from testimony a couple of different times, we have areas in our community that are underserved, particularly on the east side and the historic west side. And so the opportunity to have conversations with companies like this that help us meet the needs of our residents throughout the city would be very helpful. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Leonardo Benavides from the City of North Las Vegas. Just want to echo the comments from my colleagues at the counties and the cities. We appreciate the sponsors for taking into account the amendments that help clarify some of that language in regards to the city and local governments. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here in Carson City in support of Assembly Bill 105? Seeing none, is there anyone in Las Vegas in support of Assembly Bill 105? Seeing none there. BPS, is there anyone on the line in support of Assembly Bill 105?
Callers, if you would like to testify in support of Assembly Bill 105, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, if you would like to testify in support to Assembly Bill 105, please press star 9 now.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Brown May and Chair Watts. This is Dora Martinez representing the Nevada Disability Peer Action Coalition, and we are here wholeheartedly in support of this amazing common sense, inclusive diversity, equity, and accessibility bill. As you all know, a lot of people many of us with disability have a hard time commuting and coming over there and seeing your beautiful faces. So having this available to us and everyone makes us be available to you and calling in support. So thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
There are no other callers to participate at this time.
Thank you, BPS. At this time, we'll move into opposition. Anyone in opposition of Assembly Bill 105, please come forward, state your name, and you may begin when you're ready.
Madam Vice Chair, Craig Stevens with Cox. First, I want to say thank you to the bill sponsor. He's been incredible in trying to work with us and all of the opposition that we do have with the bill. Just wanted to talk to the committee that I think the Google representative said it best. There's a telecom statute, there's a utility statute, there's a cable statute. And we believe that there should be a broadband-only statute to just simply ask for everything that all of these folks have and the obligations that we have to our communities without having those same obligations, it's not fair. They are creating a competitive advantage over those of us who we have to provide to everyone. We have certain requirements for our customers that we have to do. There's a lot of obligations that we have to our customers and to our communities that this would get around. They themselves said they want, and I have a quote, act like a public utility, but they don't want the obligation that comes with that public utility. This is why this body went to a statewide franchise for cable, is because it was not equal. Certain governments, certain local governments were creating unequal playing fields, saying, come in here if you give us this deal, go in here. And it was impossible for companies to come in to compete. Because sure, there could be one community that they say, okay, we're gonna give 2% a fee. Then someone else comes in, and if they're not as favored, maybe they ask for 3%. There's not gonna be even competition when it comes to this. This is why it is the obligation, we believe, of the state is to make those rules and to make sure that they are giving back to this community so that they can have access to the right of way. This is not just this is not the government's property, it's our property. We pay taxes for this property, and it should not be given without an obligation to serve the community in ways just as, hey, we're gonna give you internet. There's so much more that comes with being in the right of way. There's so much more that comes with just entering our market and allowing to be in this market, because it is a privilege to be in this market, and it should remain so. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Brown May and members of the committee. My name's Kara Bush. I'm the Senior Director of Government Affairs for the West Region here at Charter Communications, more commonly known as Spectrum, in the communities that we serve. As one of the largest internet providers in the U.S., Charter believes that every Nevada resident should have reliable access to broadband. We stand ready to help bring the benefits of broadband and internet access to those who need it most. And in 2022 alone, Charter expanded its network to an additional 6,000 homes here in northern Nevada and businesses, making a $97 million capital investment in the state. Charter supports efforts to promote fair competition and increase choices for broadband consumers. We also strongly favor policies designed to foster broadband expansion to unserved areas in Nevada. The state's broadband policies, however, must ensure that competition is fair and equitable. A level playing field protects competition and therefore protects consumers by ensuring that companies compete to provide the best quality and price for their services, not to obtain more favorable treatment from the government. AB 105 would undermine fair competition by giving direct competitors different treatment by the government with respect to both fees paid to the government and access rights to easements, private properties, and the right-of-way. Nevada state law allows local governments to charge video service providers like Charter up to 5% of their gross revenues in franchise fees for the authority to place facilities in the public right-of-way. Again, while tied to the provision of video service, this authority is also the basis for a cable company's placement of broadband facilities in the right-of-way. Under AB 105, broadband providers would gain the same authority to be in the right-of-way, but without the payment of any fees. In fact, AB 105 specifically excludes broadband providers that are also video service providers from gaining the benefits of the bill. By its own terms, it expressly contemplates the creation of an inequitable regime whereby one broadband provider gains free access to something its direct competitors is required to pay for. Likewise, the bill gives one direct competitor an advantage over another in terms and conditions for access to easements, private properties, and the right-of-way. Video service providers are required to negotiate access.
If you'll wrap. Sorry, we're over the 2. If you'll just wrap.
Okay.
Thank
well,
you.
All that being said, we're committed to supporting local initiatives through many of our philanthropic efforts. We promote digital literacy. We participate in the ACP Federal Connectivity Program. We want to continue to expand our network, and we would just ask that competition is fair and equitable. Thank you.
Thank you. If you leave your written comments with the secretary, we'll make sure they all get added to the record.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman and members of the committee. Carrie Kramer on behalf of NAIOP. We're actually here in mostly support. We just have a couple of changes to a couple of sections of the bills. We've spoken to the sponsor of the bill as well as Mr. Musgrove, and we will continue to work through our concerns, but we do support broadband. We want this, we would like to see this move forward. We would just like to work on a couple of areas. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in opposition up here in Carson City? Please come forward. Go ahead and fill the seats in. You can begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair and committee members. Amy Sjogren, that's Shogren for the record, representing the Vegas Chamber. We are in opposition to this bill and look forward to working with the bill sponsor and committee members. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Chris Ferrari Reader on behalf of Verizon. Our client submitted an opposition letter, and we've been in constant communication with the chairman and appreciate his willingness to work with us. For all the reasons stated by the previous opponents, we are opposed to the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in opposition up here in Carson City? Seeing none, we'll move to Las Vegas. Anyone in opposition of Assembly Bill 105 in Las Vegas? And seeing none there, BPS, is there anyone on the phone lines in opposition of Assembly Bill 105?
There are no other callers to testify at this time.
Thank you, BPS. At this time, we'll move into neutral. Is there anyone here in neutral for Assembly Bill 105? Please come forward and fill in the chair. You may begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman. For the record, Danny Thompson, representing IBW 396 and IBW 1245. We represent all of the linemen, and we represent the gas workers in Reno and Sparks. I had initially signed in opposition to this bill because our workers work in those easements. A lineman classification is the most dangerous job in the state of Nevada, and they currently have to climb these poles. And I was glad to hear that none of this stuff was going to end up on a pole. I hope that's not their intentions, because our workers have to climb over these devices, and it's very dangerous work to begin with. And all of these things that have been added over the years get in the way. And so after listening to the amendment and listening to the testimony, however, I'd reserve the right to oppose this bill depending on how this amendment comes out. But I want to thank the chairman for working with the parties to solve these concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Tony Sanchez, Executive Vice President of NV Energy, here to represent NV Energy as neutral on this at this point. NV Energy shares the chairman's desire to see broadband expanded throughout the state. In fact, this very committee 2 years ago authorized and directed our company to build a $2 billion transmission line through many of the most rural parts of our state. And within that transmission line, we have upsized our fiber capabilities in our plans to allow broadband providers to, we're acting as the so-called middle mile provider throughout many areas of the state that currently don't have broadband. So we have a strong interest and share the desire of the chairman in why he brought this bill. The amendment provided to the bill has assisted us in understanding the intent, as well as the chairman's remarks and the remarks made by the representatives of Google. We still have a few remaining issues that we look forward to working with the bill's sponsor as we move forward. So thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Scott Leadham representing Southwest Gas today. I won't reiterate a lot of the concerns have already been brought up, in particular about the public utilities easements and the access that this bill will provide. But we are confident, based on the testimony provided by the bill sponsor and others, and that their intent is not to come in and have unfettered access to those easements. And based on that testimony, we're comfortable that we can come to an agreement with them on an amendment language, and look forward to working with the bill sponsor, Mr. Musgrove, and others who've been very responsive, and appreciate the responsiveness, and are confident we can come to an agreement on that. So we're neutral and looking forward to working with them on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Misty Grimmer with the Ferraro Group, representing the Nevada Resort Association. We also very much appreciate the goals of Assemblyman Watts. The pandemic definitely did show that there are some gaps in equal access to internet service, and so we do appreciate the goals. And as you might imagine, the last thing the Resort Association wants to be involved in is a fight between internet companies competing with each other. But a lot of our concerns were addressed in the comments of the sponsors today, and we look forward to working with them. Our concerns are focused on the easements, because even though an easement may be a public utility easement, it's still an easement on private property. And so our ability to still have some control over that, work with the people who may be looking for access to it, is still something very important. And so we look forward to working with the bill sponsor to ensure that the language of the bill still protects our rights to those easements. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in neutral up here in Carson City? Seeing none. Anyone in neutral in Las Vegas? Down in Las Vegas. Is there anyone in neutral BPS on the phone who would like to offer testimony in neutral Assembly Bill 105?
Chair, there are no other callers at this time.
Thank you, BPS. Mr. Musgrove, would you care to make a few closing remarks?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dan Musgrove on behalf of Google Fiber. Very quickly, Madam Chair, we appreciate the excellent feedback and work that this committee has obviously looked into this bill, and appreciate all the questions. And we certainly commit to everyone that we will continue working on this. Again, we just want the opportunity to bring broadband, and right now we can't. At least that's what we're told. So we'll work it out, and we'll figure it out, and we'll bring this to committee, and we'll hope for your support. So thank you very much for your attention today, and we appreciate it.
Thank you. With that, we will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 105. That brings us to the last item on our agenda, which is public comment. Because of time considerations, if you're offering public comment, we will ask you to limit your comments to 2 minutes. The island number is available. When prompted, please enter the meeting ID and then press the pound sign. Do we have anyone wishing to provide public comment up in Carson City? Anyone wishing to provide public comment in Las Vegas? BPS, is there anyone on the phone lines wishing to provide public comment?
Callers, if you would like to provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, if you would like to provide public comment, please press *9 now. Chair, there are no callers choosing to participate at this time.
Thank you, BPS. That concludes our meeting for today. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, March 7 at 1:30 p.m. This meeting is adjourned.
Awesome job.